I guess at this point in my career, there's no going back, is it? I know too much. I'm too invested in everything. I've proven myself too capable to leave. I feel like if I tried to hang all of this up, I'd be stuck awake at night thinking about every potential person saved that would be lost. That's what I get, I guess. Down that forest slope, chasing after the first beast all those years ago. And now, here I am, like Alice. Down the rabbit hole I went, never once considering how in the world I was gonna get out again. I guess, now that I'm waist deep in NATO's secret war, there's no point in even thinking about going back. Sometimes, the path of least resistance is a straight line. The only way out is forward. Sorry, rambling a bit. This is November 1, Dwight Nolan. Last we left off, I was recounting the more notable operations. The time in between has been spent with plenty of other target packages. PEXU as an organization has grown over the years, although we're still strapped for men, intel and support that we need to be fighting this thing on equal footing. It's a shadow war, plain and simple. It can't go hot, or we play right into the hands of the new advent, and they know it. You remember us speaking about Ryan Evans, right? The supposed blue-collar face of the movement that's been bringing churches, communities, and the common man together with all those golden armbands? He spoke the other night at some fest. Seemed more like a rally. Footage showed an old-school carnival, steel fences on the tall grass, cheap Ferris wheel, and him speaking to a crowd. What about? Well, in his words, ascension, not just for America, but for every soul. Society as we know it today has been so obsessed with the material wants. We've forgotten what has made us whole. Families, communities, finding the strength to carry on, and finding solace in each other. I don't know what was worse, the demented confidence in which he said it that shook me to my bones, or the roaring applause he got after. Times of hardship weaponized by ensnaring people in their traps. They preach community, but really what people find is a brotherhood that feeds them to the slaughter. Missing persons cases have been on the rise. It's getting blamed by homicide, natural disaster, war, when really intelligence agencies have been detecting human trafficking increasing in scores. Everyone who wears one of those devilish armbands smiles, skin pulling back against their skulls more and more. Monsters are living among us. We're running out of time to fight this parasite. Why am I bringing all of this up again? Well, the assignment I'm currently on is on exactly that. Yes, we are finally in the current times. We may take more trips down memory lane, but for now, my work in the Great Plains has been eventful. PEXU doesn't have a lot of allies. SMUs, Special Mission Units, reassigned due to their encounters with the anomalous. Supplies scrapped off the top of every department and branch we can get, all led by a former top NATO officer, Hammer. His policy is like his name. He's a shorter man, built like a bulldog. His ribbon rack has some stuff reaching back pre-Gulf War, and he's got the square muck of someone who has definitely eaten roadside bombs. From what I can gather, former top NATO officer due to his outspokenness for what's going on. They try to bury him in paperwork. However, found he had too many friends in places like Ground Branch to be killed off. He is probably one of the world's best hopes, a full log of dip in his lip, and enough scars to line a medical book. If we do survive, his work, like all of ours, will go completely unknown. That's the job we all agreed to. So flash forward a few weeks prior to this, I get a call from Montgomery that was, as he worded it, absolutely bloody emergency, Nolan. For years, PEXU had been trying to establish ties with other organizations like the Hunters Guild, Reservation tribes, places that had way more time and grade against the darkness than us, but astronomically less funding. Trust was hard to come by. It might seem confusing at first, but realize there are people who have usually been ignored, cast out, or ostracized due to their ancient history in dealing with the mystic ways of the worlds, now being approached by a military joint task force, just as everyone is slowly capitulating to a new world order under the gold of the new advent. I'd tell them to kick rocks and rack around. Though they were nicer, even if it was complete silence from the Hunters Guild. That was the status quo for nearly a decade. It changed a week ago when PEXU was given a request for assistance from one of the reservations out west. Now, you might be asking, why didn't they send a full SMU? Why not sick 4th Special Forces Group on them and have my old friend Captain Walker hunt them down? Despite needing dire assistance, many in the reservation were still paranoid. This was a group of them all experiencing this mass casualty event, and only one of them dared to come forward and ask. And they were still split down the middle with paranoia. Deploying an entire force? No go. This is where the solos of PEXU like myself come in. I wasn't going alone. Assigned to me was an old friend I'd been working with for a while. He was a US Marshal by the name of John Blackburn. PEXU can and will generally recruit from wherever they can get it. Blackburn's experience along with his status as a federal officer made him quite the asset. I met the Marshal down by the border near New Mexico a while back, maybe just after my first year. A pack of chupacabra had been on a cleansing path and had cleared house through 5 separate ranches. Locals began to turn up dead, so he and I were assigned to estimate their next destination, intercept, and exterminate. When I met him at the ranch, he was sitting on the hood of his Forerunner, old cattleman's hat, and a leather jacket, badge on his belt, looking like he was several cigarettes into his weight. His first words? "Yeah, you'll do," he said with a chuckle. I remember being confused and asking something to the tune of, "What's that supposed to mean?" To which he replied, "You look like you're either the coldest one I've seen in a while, or you can take a beating. I can work with either. Name's John." I shook his hand, replying, "Dwight." "How'd you get into this mess, may I ask?" The Marshal probed. I shook my head. "It's a long story." "We got 9 hours, Dwight." The hunt itself was relatively simple. We had baited them to the ranch that was empty, except for 2 gun-toting PEXUs that were ready to ambush. John took the ground level, a large campfire we had illuminating the surrounding area as he kept watch with his old-school M4. I was on the roof. Per our planning, I brought along a rifle, AR-10 and 308. A thermal I had along with a set of knots on my helmet allowed me to scan the surrounding land with pretty much no obstacles. 9 hours of nothing but catching up, cold weather, and eventually darkness. Before. "Nolan, 11 o'clock. I got movement." I quickly changed towards the north side of the roof and looked through. In the distance, there was a group of at least a dozen, 20 cult signatures heading towards us. Chups are part reptilian and canine-like, at least that's what is theorized, so it was no surprise they'd be colder than the ground around. All of the dog-like silhouettes maneuvering onto us like wolves. "They're heading for us," I said, making sure my round was seated in its chamber. "Alright, I'll draw them in. Start covering." I remember John beginning to fire off a series of rounds from the porch. Through the thermal, I could see the streaks of heat pass through and begin to impact some of them. My first round hit one in the front. I don't know if it was the pack leader, but the 308 tearing clear through its solar plexus sent them into a frenzy. I worked the bolt, hot brass hitting the roof tile as I took aim at another. With John's fire, the cold, still air reverberated with shots as we could hear all dozens of them sprint towards us. Adrenaline setting in as we quickly worked to establish fire superiority to break their charge, or they'd run up on us. That was until the sounds of movement behind me drew my attention. The scratching of tile, the huff of an animal's exhale. I flipped over and saw it. It was bigger than a wolf, disgusting hair and stretched skin mixed with reptilian-like claws and scales. Its eyes with white facing front as the frills on its back stood up. Its disgusting round mouth lined with teeth dripped with its corrosive venom. "Crap," was the only thing I could mutter as the chupacabra darted across the roof at me as I rolled. It slammed into my 308 and lost its footing. This gave me enough time to scramble to my feet and grab my rifle. Firing through, it just cut the trail and tackled into me. With my rifle pressed between me and it, I lost my footing and both of us went falling off the one-story house onto the ground. Even as it snarled and gnashed with its jaws, I still managed to make sure it landed underneath me. The second of soaring wind as both of us hit the dirt ground hard just in front of the garage. Despite this, the thing still sunk its teeth into my shoulder, my jacket and vest protecting me, although I still swore and cursed like a motherfucker. The two of us scrambled. It scratched at my gear, tore up my pants. I remember socking it straight in its jaw, pulling off my helmet and slamming the ACH directly down onto its head, stunning it. I then remember grabbing its rear half and swinging it into the brick corner of the house nearby. The snap of its spine was the answer. Not my proudest moment, but you get busy scrapping or get busy dying. By the time I gathered my senses, I got to my feet and aimed my rifle at another, dropping it with a series of shots. When I focused on the area around me, the work of Blackburn and myself became clear as the corpses of the half-reptile bloodsuckers lined the entire front. Blackburn cleared through towards my position, the both of us depressing our muzzles. "Shit, you get bit?" John asked, walking over. "Just surface damage," I muttered, dropping my vest and rolling out my right arm. "The hell happened?" the marshal asked. I answered. "One of them got onto the roof." "Ah, hell. And then?" "We fell off the roof." "Ain't that a tizzy? You'll be fine. You're still kicking," he said, proceeding to slap my recently bit shoulder. That was my introduction to Marshal Blackburn. We'd worked together a few times after that, but it had been around 8 months since John and I last linked up. We were to meet in southern Colorado in an annex used by state police and an EOD unit that had been there for a while. I pulled up to the Texan with my window down. He leaned in, shaking my hand. "Nolan, y'all doing alright? How's Solitude been?" I shrugged. "Coyotes keep leaving handprints on my gutter. Apart from that, it's all cherry. How's the family?" The marshal rolled his eyes. "Wife wants a new horse. Son wants a truck. Meanwhile, I want a vacation. Come on, I gotta set up inside." I grabbed my gear and hid it inside. Once there, a slew of equipment had been laid out for us, including advanced comms, a full array of medical aid packs, anything. I brought Zeus along. I'd run him through a few training courses, and he was loyal as can be. However, his first act was whining to Blackburn, who rolled his eyes and tossed the beast a piece of jerky. "A lot of hardware," I noted, as John handed me our target package. "Here's what we got. The reservation we're going to is in conjunction with several other towns run by the tribe's government. This started out with a single homicide. A boy stabs her sister dead in her room one night, proceeds to go to the living room and wait there in the front room coated with her parents' blood." Blackburn abridged as I read along, and I was, well, holy shit, shocked. Kid gets arrested, then disappears in the cell with 2 reservation officers on shift in the building. Since then, 27 homicides. The marshal noted, opening a folder and laying out several photos. They were, well, to be brief yet to the point, it looked like some of these people were mauled by bears, parts of their bodies torn up. Others were flayed. One person had their scalp nearly pulled off their head. Symbols of Navajo medicine men were cut into the bodies, but were warped. Some inverted, others given grotesque antitheses that were hard to look at. If I stared too long, I thought I'd go mad. The thing about it was, it didn't look like slaughter. Not entirely. It looks like something crawled out of them, I noted. Blackburn seemed to agree. "Yeah, some of this damage to themselves. Look here, September 20th. Little old lady damn near carved her way into herself with her own hands. Doesn't explain the bite marks." The marshal set the folder down. Offensive attacks and self-mutilation. Runes that were now poisonous to the Navajo culture left behind. It seemed like a plague. I asked the question I know many of you are probably gonna ask. "So, do you think this is a..." My words trailed off as he looked me dead in the eyes. "A Sierra whiskey?" he responded. Much like Situation Whiskey, Sierra Whiskey stands for a term in Navajo culture that must not be uttered. Skinwalker. No, not the regurgitated and often cannibalized version you see in media. The recognized definition of one that PEXU has defined is that of the Yi Nalt Lushi, which translates to, by means of it, it goes on all fours, or something to that effect. Thought to be witches that predate the oldest societies on North America, they've preyed on many native peoples for over a millennia. In modern times, a fair amount of rationalization has been given to them to a negative effect. Any good medicine man will tell you they come from somewhere unseen and incomprehensible. They seek only chaos and malice, and they're often completely undetectable until they start to kill. Despite this, it didn't match the evidence presented. Nah, Blackburn said, lighting himself a cigarette. The bodies of the victims are almost always never found when it comes to Sierra whiskeys. Add the fact that the mutilation matches none of the signs, and that theory spins herself off the rails very quickly. Plus, look here. He pointed to a more recent photo. A few kilometers north of one of the towns, a camping area in which the 3 inhabitants, all in their teens, were found laying face down dead. Their backs were torn open, and their bodies were of the same state as the others. However, he points to photos from the autopsy. The Achilles heels are cut perfectly, at an angle impossible for themselves to do, with precision no beast has. That's intentional debilitation of their ability to run in the simplest way. That's human. A chill ran down my spine as the situation so far was absorbed. A miasma of death, carnage, running through an area thought secure by their own means, with possible human cause, or at the very least, aided by man. Brotherhood? John exhales a ring of smoke into the air. If it ain't, I'll be surprised, but it'll be the first attack they've conducted on native land. That means one of two things. They're desperate or bold. Both are almost impossible to discern unless you're knee-deep in the shit against it. We're fixing to find out, cause we're it, apart from any help they provide us. I looked around. The setup was that of a ready room prepared for an entire team to go out, but it was just us. Montgomery's assurance of the importance of this was present, as PEXU didn't spare us any expense they would any other SMU before sending us in. Enough mats to run an 8-station, enough rounds to fuel a platoon, a US Marshal, a burnt-out staff sergeant, a dog. Around this time, Zeus had fallen asleep next to the $25,000 SATCOM kit, none the wiser of its importance or MSRP value. The last thing I asked before we hit the road. Whose car we taking? Dossier. Reservation epidemic. We loaded probably the better part of several hundred pounds of equipment into the back of John's silver Tahoe, along with hooking up a radio to a wave relay antenna mounted to the top in case we had any problems on the road. We took shifts. It was a near 10-hour drive, and once we got there, it was likely we would need to get straight to work. Yeah, there's no glamour in this. The old lawman nodded off in the seat next to me as I took us through the Colorado mountains. The earth there is some of the oldest in the world, and a lot of it is mini frontiers, untouched. When we pulled through the forests, I'm not gonna lie, it took me back to some times. Not good times necessarily. In an up-armored SUV, peeling through the forest, looking to hunt down incursions from the dark. Every once in a while, I'd check in with Maine to update them on our progress. After about 6 hours, just as the sun was lowering, we switched. Strangely, that was some of the best sleep of my life. Until the Marshal banged on the roof of the Vic, causing me to jump awake. Wake up, Army. Welcome to the Navajo Nation. We were probably several hours into it, but as the morning sun was already up and about, I saw what he was talking about. Northeast Arizona is exactly what you'd expect. Rocks and distant mesas over an uncanny flat horizon with sticks and barbs spread out so wide you could probably see a person from several clicks off. Yet, there was no one. Just dust and whatever was lurking out there. How many times you been down these parts? I asked Blackburn. He chuckled as he rolled his window down and spit some dip out. About a few, usually just investigations, he said with a slight shrug. Interested in knowing what we were getting into, I inquired with, how does working with local forces usually go? The slight roll of the eye and the huff he made told me this next mission we were on was going to be nothing but cooperation and joy. Last time I was down here, I got a gun drawn on me by a Navajo badge. I don't want to sour your taste though. Too late, Marshal. Thanks. We approached the reservation that contacted us around 9 a.m. The rocky landscape ahead had a slight ridgeline just to the south of it overlooking a sea of ground floor houses and lights breaking through the morning dusk. I couldn't help but feel a strange isolation. Sure, we had a radio as our lifeline, but we were in, well, Indian country, for a strange lack of better term. Although this might be the one time it's correct. Tensions were high, but they asked for our help. My only worry was, could we establish such a trust before whatever was reaping this area got its fill? A small checkpoint had been established on the road leading in. A pickup with 2 officers flagged us down with their lights. John slowed the truck to a halt and rolled down his window. As the officer's flashlight shined in, I let John take the lead. Yate. It was some sort of greeting, though coming from his Texan drawl, sounded damn near hilarious. He presented his badge. Chief Matsoy requested us. A long stare from the officer as he stared into the truck. He glared over to me, then to John. Who's that? My partner. I don't know him. Yeah, no shit, Gomez. You're gonna freak him out. Blackburn retorted, earning a slight chuckle from the officer. I eased up as it seemed he'd been here before, though the officer to my side kept his steely gaze. Not everyone was so trusting. You'll want to head to the station. Be wary, curfew's in place, the checkpoint officer said, letting us go. I turned to John as he opened a can of wintergreen and popped a pinch of dip into his lip. You know the law enforcement here? Tangentially, Marshall retorted. About a few of them. You didn't think to bring that up earlier? I asked. Didn't know how many of them were left. Some ambushes got a few a week ago, Blackburn said. My blood ran cold. What? The hell you mean? Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked, only for him to gaze over. Cause that's a courtesy given to me by Matsoy, the local police chief we're going to meet. Not PEXU privy. He'll tell you yourself. Easy, Nolan. Stuff rolls differently around these parts. Clearly. We parked in front of the station, the ringing of the doorbell grazing us to the dead silent town around us. As Blackburn and I exited, I popped open the back door as Zeus trotted out. The dog quickly made himself known by marking his territory on a nearby post. Hopefully, there's no land issues between him and some cryptid, though my money is on the Belgian Mal. Usually, there's a lot more life to these parts, John says, walking around to my right. An air of dark blue dust skies and mist hung over the orange lights of the houses, where some of the only ambient light goes for a lot of the world nowadays. I muttered, the pressure of everything on our shoulders. Guess we better get used to goose-stepping with golden wristbands. John chuckled, slapping my shoulder. Great, really reassuring, though the positive talk was cut by the sounds of steps. From out of the dark of the station walked an absolute tank-sized man, outsizing both me and John, probably put together with Zeus. There was a cold, calculated gaze in his eyes as he exited, a cap sporting the department logo of his town as he approached the both of us. He stopped. There was a moment of tense silence before he shook Blackburn's hands with a smirk. John, I thought you said you were retiring. The marshal shrugged. Yeah, well, Betty wants the house paid off before she's 50. So I guess I'm still on satanic cleanup. He turned his eyes to me. This is Dwight Nolan, former army, real pipe hitter with PEXU. I shook hands with the lawman, his grip as viceful as his stare. He introduced himself as Matsoy Klachashilich. I hope that's correct, meaning abandoned. Though for the duration of our work together, he told me to just refer to him as his first name. Since we'd be working alongside him, we were to meet with local leaders. A pseudo-emergency council enacted with the curfew, but we had a few hours, so Matsoy caught us up on any more information. Things had gotten bad. 27 jumped to 35 within the last 72 hours. In his operations room, he laid out a map. All of the red pins marking the incidents started around the outskirts and were slowly closing in. The deepest had been just a few blocks from the station. The first one, the boy who murdered his sister. The most violent one was the ambush, as John and Matsoy called it. I got handed a large photo of the front driver's side of the truck. The logo of their department was covered in blood that was caked on the doors, hood, the entire windshield busted, as the entire body of the truck was shredded with marks. The insides were gutted, and electronics rendered completely scrapped, with the radio torn out and missing. How many officers? I asked, steadying my voice as adrenaline shot into my veins. 4, sent on a call to the south of town. Once they reached an intersection near the town's perimeter, their transponder went off. The follow-up party, included myself, found this, Matsoy said, pointing to the photo. I took that picture. Any remains? I asked. Matsoy shook his head. The first attack on our law enforcers, and there are no signs of them or their bodies. Equipment scattered. Whatever attacked them knew aggression was key, and it won. Matsoy said, a dark look in his eye. A torn basket weave police belt was laying outside of the driver's side door as a broken hand mic hung from its stretched cord. Give it to me straight. What is this? Weshuge? Sierra whiskey? John asked. Matsoy's eyes snapped to him. No. This caused confusion in the marshal as we all surrounded the table, the full situation laid out. You sure? This is my history, Marshal, Matsoy said with a deep seriousness in his tone. Something not of our lands has come here. It's permeating an evil. The things you suggest wouldn't dare invade like they are. This is alien, as you would say. It had to have been brought here. Well, who would do that? John asked. I had a sneaking suspicion. An intelligent threat that knew the defenses were secure and thus needed to import heavier firepower. Something looking to win a war. We headed up to the meeting hall a few hours later. It was imperative to make a good impression, as in Matsoy's words. How we break this to them will lead to a decade of cooperation, or a dead end, something we can't afford right now. Great, no pressure. Thanks, lawman. It was a grey concrete building with white paint on the outside that had long since been chipped. Artwork in the style of old paintings of the Navajo Nation, and dozens of stories all intertwining was like a feast for the eyes. As we walked in, wooden planks lined the walls as we approached a long table. 4 individuals were seated. An older man in his late 40s, effectively the mayor, an old ponytail stretching back out of his old leather jacket that was lined with patches. Most were handmade. However, I recognized others. The 101st Screaming Eagles, 25th Tropic Lightning, 3rd ID Rock of the Marne. Next to him sat an older woman with a younger man, 2 leaders of the town. To his right was an old lady pushing well into her 80s. With respect, ma'am. They were an assembled group of the town's most senior and experienced. They were also the people we had to convince. No pressure. Matsoy approached with a small bow. As we spoke to them in Navajo, the younger woman and the man both stared intensely, unapproving as they kept eyeing the marshal and myself. The mayor nodded with his eyes locked onto Matsoy. The older lady immediately beckoned Zeus over. Against my better judgment, I made a small whistle, and he trotted over. This caused the mayor to smirk, as who I found out later to be his wife began to play with the hound. The other 2, the senior town woman and the medicine man, didn't seem convinced. Matsoy gestured to us, Marshal John Blackburn, and the medicine man immediately spoke up. We know who the marshal is. I thought I told you to tread lightly if you returned here, John. I gave a quick side-eye to the marshal as Matsoy stepped back. I started to realize he had a lot more history with this place than just career experience in the region. Remind me later to shake the info out of him before we progress further. To his credit, Blackburn tried his best to be diplomatic. I've come on better terms, Niall. We're answering a call for help. It did little to satiate them. Save it! We did not summon you here. Not in a unified manner. This is the business of our community, not you and your government. John glanced to the side at Matsoy. The medicine man immediately turned his ire to me. You! Why do you hide behind the marshal? Who are you? Dwight Nolan. I believe your police chief was about to tell you that. I responded a little more crass than I should have. Albeit, that earned a chuckle from the mayor's wife and seemed to put the man on the back foot. It was at this point the mayor himself sat up, and in a voice that sounded like old iron, spoke. Then tell us, Dwight Nolan, why have they sent you? I've made a recent career in unconventional extermination. I've proved it everywhere from here to Europe to Korea. You've got yourself a problem you can't handle alone. I can see it in your eyes, I said, trying to summon the tone I briefed all battalion level officers whenever I got dragged out of company to perform senior NCO duties. The medicine man seemed to roll his eyes, to which our marshal crossed his arms, retorting with a, he's right. Your chief here is strapped for options. He was the bigger man, so was your mayor. Look, I get it. Your people have been burned throughout all of history, I said, trying to level with them. I was met with the stares of conviction from every single person at that table. But you've got to see the writing on the wall. How many of your people have been harvested? John spoke up soon after. We're not here for money. If we were, there's a lot better options closer to home. We've seen what's out there. Hell, this old soldier's seen just as much as I have in half the time. The world's dying. You've seen it. We all have. The mayor's gaze seemed to change. He turned to me. You were in the service? The feeling was weird. Even before he said anything, I knew it was one old vet to another. A familiar connection in strange territory. 2nd Brigade out of Drum. A faint smile twitched at the edge of his mouth as he said, Rakasans. Campbell, huh? I chuckled, quipping, Air assault. This tangent seemed to piss the medicine man off, who barked at the mayor in Navajo. Matsoy later told me he said something akin to, Enough of this nostalgia trip, I'll say. To which the mayor shouted back in a way that made me feel like my ass was getting chewed out again, shaking the room. Matsoy wouldn't tell me what he said, but the look in his eye as he glared over at John and I told me that Neol hit a nerve. The mayor then sat back in his chair, his temper cooled as he muttered, I am tired of burying our loved ones. We cannot go it alone. Not anymore. The world has changed. And if we don't act, there won't be anyone left to populate it when this is a graveyard of. There was a tense gasp of wind from that last sentence. Guess Altse invoked something. He looked to Matsoy leaning forward and folding his hands on the table. We must act. We must do it now. No more division. No more separation. If we don't, we lose the world, our future, and damn our children that are still breathing. If that is not enough, I don't believe you. I looked over to the medicine man, Neol, who seemed to let go of whatever was eating at him and not, as did the woman next to him. Altse's wife was still playing with Zeus, who rested his head on her lap as she continued to play with him as if he were a puppy. Altse himself turned to us with a single order. Whatever you need, just hunt it down and put an end to this. Matsoy nodded, and I responded, Roger that. Something that seemed to earn a chuckle from the mayor and relieve whatever tension was in his mind. Zeus trotted back over as we left. First thing outside, Blackburn breathed the cool autumn air, taking off his Stetson. That could have gone worse. Much worse, Matsoy added, jabbing Blackburn, earning an eye roll from the marshal. You gonna start telling me the full story or giving me bits and pieces? I said, John and I locking eyes. The Texan native stepped forward. How about this? You keep winning hearts and minds, and by the time we're cooking steaks after this, I'll tell you all my little dark secrets. Sounds fair, Staff Sergeant? Just let me know if we're walking into a loaded conversation next time. I sit back, none too pleased. Listen, we did it. Now, we make preparations. Tonight will be rough, Matsoy said. Oh boy, that was not a fucking understatement. Matsoy had sat Blackburn and myself up in a storage room towards the back of the police station. While not the most classy, what it did provide was direct access to work with their comms, space for all of the equipment, and 1-foot-thick concrete walls. Although as my hands ran over one of them, I kept thinking back to that picture of the ambush, the gashes through chassis and metal, the blood, the carnage. Whatever was roaming around here wouldn't be stopped by this. By nightfall, we had set up 2 cots and gotten some early wings. We were gonna be up all night. Come 2100 hours, we were shoving radios onto our vests, strapping the vest and ammo onto our bodies, and loading up into the Vic. We slow cradled through the roads of the town where asphalt intermingled with dirt and gravel. My rifle sat between my legs. I tried to go as low profile as I could with a jacket and jeans, though the gun belt and plate full rig made it hard not to stand out like a, well, as John put it, incognito as fuck. I chuckled, to which the marshal threw a hand up. I'm serious. Not like whatever's out here can't sense us. Probably smells like the anthrax shots Uncle Sam shoved into you from a mile away. Zeus kept walking around the back seat, looking out either window. Your dog's freaking me out. Just then, my pelters lit up as Matsoy could be heard. I just got a call from the north side of town. Screams. Reported break-in. Sending you the address. John stepped on it as his SUV kicked up half a pound of dirt. I quickly punched into the ATAC mounted on my rig as we sped off. To a right, then a left. While he swerved around each corner, I press-checked my Glock and prepped my rifle. I pulled on my grey helmet, a regular old army ACH with a set of dual tubes. I learned well enough, if we were fighting at night, even the odds. Which one? This blue one up on the right. Dwight, they're all fucking blue. The one that says 612. I quickly bolted out of the passenger seat with John in tow. The marshal brought along his M4 as he and I rushed for the door. We were joined by Matsoy, who held his pistol and flashlight old school style. "Let me lead," he shouted. He announced ourselves as we followed him in. The air stunk of rot decay, causing all of us, including the 2 officers he brought along, to gag. "Police! Monica, are you here?" Matsoy shouted. A woman answered in manic cries that caused my hair to stand on end from the hallway leading off to the left. We arrived. And Christ. The woman was on her knees. The carpet of the room was covered in some sort of black tar as she held the scrap of what we later learned was his shirt. The substance seemed to be coating her arm, her eyes red with tears. My brother is gone. She was hyperventilating so bad, Matsoy attempted to console her. While snapping back to the windows, John and I trained a barrel on each. Both shattered open. "Monica, tell me what happened. Please." Screaming. I was a second away from the room. I entered and something was dragging him through the windows, she said, breaking down again. What was it? Matsoy asked. John quickly lowered his barrel. "We'll backfill later. Search the perimeter." As we broke off from the reservation police, I could hear her say, "Anaye." John quickly rounded the house. I had other ideas. We had a 110 pounds assault weapon on 4 legs that was born to track targets. Zeus was already scratching at the door as I whipped it open, then proceeded to make like the cruise missile he is and shot off into the darkness, faster than I could keep up. Shit. Zeus, heal! I shouted, flipping down my knots and taking off after him. I am not made to run as fast as I did, faster than I was even at peak physical strength in my youth. Through the blue and white hue of the night vision, I could faintly see him as he took off, through the brush over the ridge behind the house, then down into a ditch. We must have ran for what was maybe a good 50 meters before he dead stopped, causing me to nearly trip over him. Zeus was at my leg as I fought to catch my breath, and I quickly realized it was silent. I had to pivot hard into the dirt for there to even be an echo. It wasn't just nature silent. Ambient noise was being cut off by something. I looked around. Standing at the bottom of the ditch with my hound, we were flanked on all sides by darkness. My binoculars could make out the stairs, the terrain, but not much else. My hands gripped my rifle. Zeus was trained to track his target till he reached it, and he had stopped. The Belgian Mal began to bark forward, further down the ditch at something. My rifle was raised as I flicked my laser into IR flood, a mode that allows a flashlight effect that won't blind me under night vision. This time, it seemed to show through the darkness, and I wish it hadn't. Almost as if it formed out of the ground and shadows around. It stood up, unnaturally tall, arms spindly, like that of crows or coyotes that meshed together. It was bow-legged, but then switched to frontward kneecaps. I could make out its silhouette very clearly, and I should have been able to see more detail, but it just didn't let me, like I was being denied it. It turned. Its head was both large and yet not. I can't. The only way I could describe it is that I literally saw its shape was both at different dimensions of size at different times. It didn't have a face, not that I could see, until it stood straight to look at me, nearly 10 feet tall. Then, its eyes seemed to light up, reflective like any animal's would be when it sees things in the dark. It could see me, just like the several dozen other eyes could that shone through after. "This is November 1, multiple contacts!" I shouted into my pelter's mic as I took aim and fired, my laser taking aim on the figure along with several others. It seemed to almost instantaneously vanish, even as the rest of the eyes continued to remain. It didn't matter as my suppressor snapped, as rounds were sent down the ditch. Zeus continued to growl, in fighting stance in case anything changed. Nothing did. I paused for a moment, scanning as I heard the sounds of footsteps nearby. I pivoted, preparing to defend myself, only to see Blackburn scan from the top of the ditch. Tense, he looked to me. "I'm a wager you saw that shit too." "No shit. The hell did we just make contact with?" As the marshal scanned around, a series of flashlights from behind blinded me, forcing me to flick up my knots as a series of yells came from our end of the ditch. A group of reservation officers had caught up, to which John snapped, "Shut up, shut up, shut your fucks, shut up." They stopped, some of them scanning as the marshal scowled. "Fuck's sakes, coming in here louder than skeletons fucking on a tin roof." "Thanks for that, John. That's permanently in my brain now." A series of gunshots up ahead from the direction our target left caused me to flick down my knots. The group of us pushed forward, everyone picking up a sector of fire as we moved near towards the location I saw it. Matsoy stood in the exact spot, scanning the ground. He looked over to me. No reflection. He was good. Thank God, because my laser wasn't exactly off him. I don't even know how he had managed to circumvent all of us and reach the area before we did. Then again, this was his territory. He had pulled on a latex glove, the kind you case evidence with, and lifted a scrap off the ground. A single fragment of white cloth, the same kind the woman was gripping, drenched in the ichor. "Your contact was here?" Matsoy asked. "Sure was. All 10 feet of him," Blackburn retorted. "Along with the dozen others," I added. I cocked my head at the substance left behind. "What is it? And what was it?" Matsoy didn't respond for a long time. He backed up the evidence with the shred from the house. The only thing he said was, "If I can confirm it tomorrow morning, then our task has just gotten a lot harder." "Well, what was it? What's the theory?" Blackburn pressed. Matsoy ignored him, simply saying, "You two did good work. Hit to bed. We will talk in the morning." John wasn't happy. He still isn't. I'm not either. I've got a feeling we just stepped in something generational. "What do you know? Matsoy's calling us now. I'll brief you on what's next. Till then, November 1, signing off.